So in my intervention work over the decades, I have never approached it as I'm going to get somebody out of a cult or I'm going to persuade someone that they're in a bad group or whatever. For me, my frame has always been to provide a set of knowledge and experiences, to do psychoeducation, so that the person can make an informed decision whether they want to stay in the group or leave the group. But it's up to them. So what's the word? To add on to the comments that John was just making, I would say if one of these leaders sat down with me for 3 days and heard my presentations and watched my videos, and because he wanted to, and he then said, no, I want to be in the church because I have my living there and my money there and everything else, then I would say he's doing it knowingly, and then I would have a question about just how spiritual he actually is, personally. But what I'm trying to convey is you don't know what you don't know, but learning these models, especially in the context like Chinese communist brainwashing or pimps and traffickers, understanding how they recruit and groom and indoctrinate people to become slaves, then you have a burden of responsibility to that knowledge. So I wanted to add that. Healthy organizations, there are legitimate reasons to leave. The unhealthy ones, there's never a legitimate reason to leave. You're always leaving because you're weak, you're stupid, you're not spiritual, you're doing sin, you're doing blah, 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 blah. In my opinion, if you don't like being in a group, you have a legitimate reason to leave. If you're not happy there, if you find a different group that fulfills your needs better, that's a legitimate reason to leave. If you discover somebody's a liar or a pedophile, that's a legitimate reason to leave. The important thing is you need to have criteria internally, not use the group's criteria. You develop criteria based on human rights, on what is true, and being honest with yourself. So I think because of time, I should end here, but I'm going to just...
We definitely have another 15 minutes before there's...
We have another 15 minutes. So I have a bunch of slides from my course about, and what I say to clinicians is don't expect someone to come into your office and say, I was in a cult, help me. But they'll come in with a variety of symptoms. Then you should do a good background history on, tell me about your childhood. Were you involved with a religious group? Were there strict, rigid rules and regulations? Was there corporal punishment? Corporal punishment, by the way, is banned in most civilized countries because they know that it's harmful for childhood development. Has anybody been spanked or hit? Yeah. And I know, spare the rod and spoil the child. Modern science says that's BS. There's much better ways to discipline children where you're cultivating a healthy sense of self and where you're avoiding creating a relationship of fear and to obedience. Like, you have to obey or you're going to get hit. And I want to cite quickly a book by a former social worker who's working to challenge all the laws. There's still, 13 states that say it's okay to do corporal punishment. It's called The Holocaust Lessons, and I have interviews with him on my website. Why he called it the Holocaust Lessons? Because he cited a study of people who resisted the Nazis' demands to turn over Jews in their towns, and they all were not corporally punished. The ones who were corporally punished turned over their friends, their neighbors to the Nazis because they were trained to obey authority on a very, very fundamental childhood way. So common symptoms, identity confusion. Somebody stood up earlier and said, I don't know who I am. This is very normal. I want to tell that woman, this is normal. I was there. I felt that. I don't know who I am. What do I believe? What's up? What's down? Help. And thankfully, I had loving family and friends who showed me pictures and videos and told me stories and memories of who I was before the cult. I had actually been trained and indoctrinated in my cult identity to believe I had a terrible childhood and I was abused. And it was just a lot of false memories, basically. And my sister, my friends challenged it. It's like, give me an example for that, you know? And it's like, well, Dad did slap me once when I was 13. Really? What happened? Well, he caught me lying. It was true story. He had given me lunch money, and I spent it on baseball cards, and I lied and said I lost the money, and he slapped me on the face like that. It was that hard. I cried, but so my sister Thea said, so he slapped you once? Give me another example. I couldn't think of any other time that my father had hit me. So it had to challenge that ideology in that. In any case, different people need to do different strategies to figure out who they are and who they want to be. But when you leave a worldview, an organization, a social network, you need to develop other social networks. You need to explore and identify other models for how people look at reality and learn and grow. And you're not alone. There are people who have left many years before you, and listening to Mormon stories and hearing there is life after group is so incredibly valuable. When I got out of the Moonies, there was no internet. We didn't know each other. It was really much harder to recover.
Would you mind sharing the quote about healing in stories that you've shared a few times in the past few days?
You have to remind me.
About, there's a professional who said that
Judith Herman. So one of the world's famous trauma psychiatrists, her name is Judith Herman. She wrote a book called Trauma and Recovery. And it's a very important book. I encourage you to read it, especially if you're a therapist. But she basically said the number one method to help people recover is for trauma victims to tell their story and be believed. You're not alone, you're not crazy. Someone else who came up said, I feel like I'm being gaslit all the time. That's what it's like leaving a mind control cult. And I remember that feeling when I first left. I was going, okay, well, the entire group thinks I'm satanic. I have maybe 20, 30 family members and friends who know I'm a good person. But there are like millions of people who think I'm satanic, and I had all these phobias in my mind. I didn't know about phobias as a specific thing for years. After I knew I didn't want to be in the group, etc. But once I learned that concept, then I had to think back. So at what point was the phobias really installed? And in my experience, Moon had taken all the New York members to see the Exorcist movie in Greenwich Village to watch the movie. Then we were brought to Tarrytown and heard Moon, the Messiah, say, God made The Exorcist. This movie is a prophecy of what happens to you if you leave the Unification Church. And from that moment on, every time I had a doubt or whatever, I thought it was demons trying to invade my mind, and I did what I was told to do: chant, pray, sing holy songs to cleanse my mind, to get rid of the doubt. And I was deathly afraid of leaving the group. And that's also part of the trauma in my deprogramming, and in the early days of deprogramming, they would try to convince people to leave the group without explaining that they had these irrational fears that they would be possessed by demons. So I try to explain up front before I talk about what the problems are with the group, about what is a phobia versus a legitimate fear, and how to resolve a phobia, and then how other groups put phobias in people's minds to control them, as a beginning to help people realize that these are irrational fears put in our minds deliberately to keep us dependent and obedient.
Okay, as they're concluding their setting up, what I think it might make sense to do is pause the slide presentation for now and maybe spend 10 minutes hearing either a brief 30-second observation that you've made, that something you've connected with that really, that you would like to share, or a very brief question. We won't have time for long comments or extended back and forths between us and Steve because lunch is waiting, but let's take a moment to hear a little bit from the audience. Is that okay? And I'm just gonna run the mic around and we'll take turns.
Just earlier I was thinking that fasting, sleep deprivation, all of the work and stuff from contributing to that, fasting, testimony meeting, having kids, and then having that spiritual bear testimony to gain a testimony, girls camp, trek, being exhausted, telling you, like Moroni's promise itself is kind of gaslighting, or this is what you're gonna feel if you don't feel it, it's something wrong with you. So yeah, that was.
So was fasting a thing in the Mormons?
Yeah.
Because Moonies fasted a lot. I did 2 7-day fasts with just water and 4 3-day fasts. And you did full days of work when you were fasting.
Mormons fast once a month on the first Sunday of the month for 2 meals, except for the hardcore may do more than 2 meals, but fasting is a monthly ritual within Mormonism.
So interesting.
And you bear your testimony, right? Yeah, and you contribute more.
Real fast. I was gonna say I developed an eating disorder from the perfectionism and then the fasting, and I would do it like every week because I thought I was more spiritual, and then and then leaders would like praise that. So
that was fascinating. Can anyone else resonate with that one? Oh, we should. About developing an eating disorder from the fasting and thinking if I eat less, then I'll be a better person, I'll be more righteous. Did I say it right way?
Okay, so my connection was the phobia and fear, because I experienced a lot of that when I was divorcing my husband. I was told I was going to hell, I didn't deserve my children, I wouldn't spend eternity with my family, and I just needed to live with the unhappiness I was experiencing in the marriage for the benefit of the children.
We're not clapping for what you were told. We're thanking you for sharing.
What you said about having being able to speak your story and be believed. I think a lot of us feel so isolated. Like we don't talk to anybody at all, or we feel like alone or wrong, or it really struck me how important it is to come and talk and hear other people, and that's why Mormon Stories and other deconstructions from other religions have been so important to me, is that connection.
Yes.
Thank you, very beautiful. Yes, we are clapping for the vulnerability, not in celebration of pain and suffering.
And we believe
Thank you for
you. We believe you. We validate you. You're here. Thank you for coming.
One of the biggest issues that we won't be addressing in depth, but that everyone comes to understand, is how to find community after. Obviously, if you go to Thrive Beyond Religion, you can go to a map where you can find hopefully a local Thrive group in your area that you can connect to and make friends. The Ex-Mormon Reddit is a wonderful place for community. 250,000 subscribers at this point, where you can go up there, even though it's anonymous, and share your thoughts and feelings and get feedback. The Mormon Stories podcast Facebook community has 15 or 20,000 people in it. There are some amazing support groups for women along the Wasatch Front. One is called WACA, Women of a Certain Age. You can go to Facebook and look up WACA Worldwide to find an amazing support group for women. There's also an amazing Facebook group called Faith Journey Meetups, which is run by Chelsea Homer. It has almost 20,000 people at this point. They hold monthly events along the Wasatch Front. Again, Thrive is meant to be outside of Utah for those of you. And Thrive is not just, and by the way, again, there's no money in Thrive. We're not trying to make any money. It's run at a loss. It's just a resource to help you either find community or create community. So if you go to the thrivebeyondreligion.com website, you can't find a local community. You can actually say, hey, I want to be a leader and start a Thrive community in our area, and then you can be the hub the hub around which a community gets built. So there also is an incredible community called Marriage on a Tightrope. If any of you are in a mixed faith marriage and you're looking for support, you can join the Marriage on a Tightrope Facebook group. They do quarterly workshops for mixed faith couples with Natasha Helfer. That's an amazing resource. And they even have these amazing Marco Polo groups where believing husbands can go to get support in a Marco Polo group, non-believing husbands, believing wives and non-believing wives, all in a Marco Polo sort of setting. So these are just some of the community resources that we provide or that we know of, because finding community is a huge part of healing and growth.
And I'll just say that real life friendships and relationships are better than online relationships. So if there's a choice, find a real live human being you can sit down with and share a meal with and have a real life, in real life.
Okay, let's get a couple more. Raise your hand high. Okay.
I just kept thinking about when you were talking about Satan, we're literally told in our temple that if we do not, and they look right into the camera, if you do not live up to the covenants you make this day, you will be in the power of Satan. And just a couple weeks ago, my kids, I'm brand new out, just got my name removed in January, and trying to talk to my kids, they're kind of in and out, they don't really care, but one of them said, why is this such a big deal? And I said to him, I have been told that I am now in Satan's power, and I'm trying to remind myself that I'm a good person.
So if I may, John, respond to that. So that is a universal with religious cults that use Satan as a tool of control. And I just want to share a healing technique now. It's a little bit early, but I want to, and the thing is that when a programming thing happens, like I described with the Exorcist movie, and Moon said God made the Exorcist movie, for me to uninstall that phobia, I needed to go back in my mind to that room in that space and time with the resources I have now, and imagine what I would have wanted to say and do if I had known then what I know now. So what I visualized, and I did it a bunch of different ways, but I imagined myself, and we were all kneeling on concrete floors, and he was up on a stage, I literally imagine standing up and saying, "Are you kidding me? A Hollywood movie was made by God? Are you frickin' nuts? I'm out of here. Bye." And I got up and walked out. And I called some of my friends to join me with me. It was in my mind, it was not the historical reality. But what I was doing was going into my cult identity and helping me exit. By naming that's a phobia indoctrination. Ugh. Keep it over there. It has nothing to do with me. That's a mind control technique. So this is part of how we recover, is to control our own minds by using what we know in the here and now and retrofitting it into our key moment experiences in order to liberate us. Because we want to have integrity, we want to have connection. And if you know something's a phobia, because you've heard it, that it's done in 1,000 other mind control cults, why would you give any power to that? Does that make sense? Does that work? To imagine you going back and going, what? Whatever. And I would like to add one more piece, and we'll do more about it later, but I'd like to do a piece today on the best ways to help our children, because there are some things in our adult processing that we need to keep separate from the way we communicate with our kids for their own protection and to help empower them the most. So I just wanted to put a pin in that thing. I want to come back to it before the end of the day, please.
All right. There were some hands back here, and then we'll come back forward, okay? I want to make sure we get all the people that have already raised their hands. Who's next? Okay.
I have a question about a mechanism. I wasn't there yesterday, but I would put money on it that the people that were standing and screaming about LGBTQ people were the parents and the siblings and the cousins of those people. And I listened to your Mormon story, and you talked about that the moment that moved for you was when your father said, "What would you do if you had a son?" So what I want to know is why, when we're in extreme pain, we deny, but why will we do it for someone else? What's that for humans?
Good question. The first thing that comes to my mind is if you are raised in a belief system that you're less important than others, and your orientation as a woman in particular is to be a people pleaser and take care of others, then you may be on automatic pilot. And that's another piece I'd like to come back to with women's rights. It's like, if you grew up and you weren't in a patriarchal authoritarian system and you were taught that women have equal rights to men and deserve it and are as smart as them, that's the environment I grew up in the 60s and 70s. Women were burning their bras, and I have 2 older sisters, and it's like I had to think twice about opening a door for a woman because I didn't want her to be angry at me. I can open my own door, but that's the way it was when I was younger. But for those of you who didn't have that experience, to imagine growing up in a country where women have equal rights and women are CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, and of course that's normal. And there should be more women in running countries and other things like that, right? So, thank you.
And we have a couple questions here in the back.
I just had a comment. This is about with the Mooney marriages, where you just line them up and put them together. Though we weren't that extreme, there is a teaching in the church that any good woman and any good LDS woman and any good LDS man can make a marriage work if they're properly devoted to the gospel. If that was what they were both concentrating on.
any marriage could work. Of course, they did prefer you to stay within your own race and social class and whatnot, so, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of parallels, but there were, the marriages didn't work in the Moonies, by the way. Almost all of them, somebody left and they maybe got remarried to somebody else. But I did an interview with a young man who was born into the Moonies recently. He lives in the UK, if you're interested in a perspective of someone who was raised in the Moonies. His name is Elgin Strait. He has a podcast also. Moonies are a mind control cult. So Moon is perfect, the doctrine is perfect, the policy is perfect. So if you're not happy or you happen to be married to a gay person who's not attracted to you and refuses to have sex, that's your fault.
One thing I made a connection to is the dispensing of existence. I connected that to the temple, when if we're not worthy of the temple and not worthy, we can't exist with our family eternally. And I think that's such a damaging thing that, like, it breaks families up. And so it's definitely part of one of the 8 where dispensing of existence is dispensing of worthiness, and you can't exist within the church in the eternity. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
That's great. I want to do another teaching point for recovery, if I may, and that is becoming really aware of your languaging, because if you're out of the group, you should talk in the past tense and talk about they taught versus we, or talk about it in the present. This is just my opinion as a therapist, having worked with this population, that a lot of times people talk about the past in present tense. And I'll say one more important teaching point. Are we almost ready for lunch? Not yet, okay. But here's another very important teaching point, and that is human beings have the ability to remember things in 2 different modes, what we call associated memories or dissociated memories. And how it was first explained to me is my teacher said, have you ever been in a roller coaster? And I thought back, yup. So when you think about that experience, are you in the roller coaster or are you watching yourself in the roller coaster? So if you're in the roller coaster, you're having an associated memory, so therefore some of the fear comes back in your body from that experience. But if you're standing watching you going around in the roller coaster, you can see you going, ah, but you're not feeling it in your body because you're seeing it from another perspective, right? And basically, speaking as a therapist, we want to recode all of our earlier traumatic memories and make it clear that it happened to the younger me. Like, it's not happening to me in this moment, in my body, in the here and now. So we want to make it a default that it's on a TV screen or over on the side somewhere. I do it on the left side, but some people may want to do it on the right side or up or down. And you can make the screen really big in color, or you can make it really small and black and white. You can play with that, those modalities. But the critical thing is post-traumatic stress disorder is typically you're getting triggered to have an associated traumatic memory. That's what it's about. So a veteran hears a loud noise. The loud noise reminded them of when they were in war and a bomb, blew up their best friend. But that sound was a trigger for that associated traumatic memory. The way to neutralize that trigger is to expose the person voluntarily to other loud noises where they have a new association to a loud noise, like a motorcycle backfire or, something else. But the important message I want to convey to you for the whole day is it's your mind. You should control it. Don't look outside for someone else to tell you what to think, feel, or act. Take responsibility. It's my life. I want to live it to its fullest, and I want to understand how the mind works and use it in a way that serves my needs and goals and values and, others.
So in our podcast, did any of you listen to my interview with Steve at all? Did you guys catch the part where he called me out for, what did he call me out for? For what? Saying us, right? We've already had a very interesting discussion by that, and it's even more interesting because I'm influenced by the Jewish tradition. So I just want to take a quick poll and have a very brief discussion about this because I'm curious. So when I was still a semi-believing or a progressive Mormon, I learned about Reform Judaism, which is as I understand it, a branch of Judaism where you don't have to believe in God. You don't even have to believe that the founder of your religion, Moses, ever existed as a historical person, but you're still a Jew. You can still attend Shabbat attend the temple on Shabbat, and you can still have your kids bar mitzvahed and bat mitzvahed, and that's totally legitimate. And to take it even one step further, there's a joke that I've heard fellow Jewish friends make, which is, what do you call a Jew who doesn't believe Moses ever existed and who doesn't believe in God? And what would the answer be to that, Steve?
I'm sorry, I spaced out.
I lost him. The answer is a Jew, right? In other words, I've been told that, I was taught by the Jewish people to think about identity as being something that's not necessarily tied to belief or affiliation. In other words, being Jewish can be a cultural affiliation. I don't like to think of myself as being cut off from the Mormon people. And because conveniently, recently, President Russell M. Nelson has, declared the identity of Mormon as being an evil, bad thing that's a victory for Satan, I'm still okay identifying as a member of the Mormon people. And so that's why when I say us and I say we, I still feel a connection to the Mormon people. I still want to be a part of helping make the Mormon people healthier. And in some sense, I still very much affiliate internally as a Mormon, not a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, not as a believer, but as a cultural Mormon. Now, I just have a question really quickly. How many of you do feel similar to what I just said? Raise your hand. So over half of you. How many of you don't want anything to do with the identity of Mormon? Okay, that's far less than half. Now, I'm not saying that makes me right.
No, I'm saying people should decide for themselves, and I was just reacting, listening to you talk.
Oh, I'm not calling you out.
Yeah.
I'm inviting to have a discussion. Because what I think is
I
really...
can tell you more about Judaism and why I think it's different than the Mormon Church.
Yeah, please. I'm curious. Yeah.
You want me to do that now?
Yeah, just for a sec.
Okay. First of all, Judaism was an oral tradition based on a animal sacrifice temple worship that modern-day Jews all know their temples were destroyed. That's the end of that era. And there are a few Christian nationalists who want to bring back the temple and are trying to breed a red heifer and all kinds of other weirdo things. But for Jews, like our greatest figure, Moses, didn't enter the promised land. Nobody knows where he lived. He was never held up. Like, he was told to go and liberate the people from Pharaoh, and he's like, no, I have a speech impediment, not me. And it was like, well, we'll give you your brother, go and do it. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is that, because it's such an ancient religion, what a lot of people don't understand is that there has been a tradition of rabbinic interpretation over the earlier scriptures, and what a lot of people don't understand is that when one analyzes, it's called the Torah in the Jewish tradition, not the Old Testament. What you need to understand is what you read in the Old Testament is not a correct translation of the Torah. And if you want to read a more correct translation, I would encourage you to be in touch with me, and I can give you some more accurate translations. There are a bunch of words that still nobody knows currently what they mean or what it refers to. But what else did I want to say? So, and even in Judaism, the right to call out God and say, you're overreacting. That's not okay. You want to kill all these people, and what kind of God are you? And it's so clearly an anthropomorphism from the ancient times that modern day Jews don't believe in a man, with a beard on a cloud. What else do I want to say? There's nothing about gayness in the Torah. There is a line about men shouldn't lie with men. There's nothing about lesbianism. There's nothing about anything else. And there's even challenges by many modern rabbis that the whole homophobic thing is just not grounded in our tradition. And it's a religion that has also been influenced by different countries, because Jews were persecuted and they would go to different places and they'd absorb other traditions and things. And right now what's happening in Israel is a retro, movement by ultra right-wing cults, mind control cults, that would look at me and say, I'm not Jewish, period, because I drive on Shabbat, for example, or I flip a light switch. But anyway, going back to why I think is a difference between Reform or Renewal Judaism and Mormonism. Mormonism is younger, newer, and Joseph Smith, we know a lot about Joseph Smith. There's facts about Joseph Smith, and he really was not a good person. He's just not someone that I think.
How dare you, Stephen Hassan?
Like Moses.
Who do you think you are?
Moses screwed up and he struck the rock twice instead of once. But he was never looked at as the ideal person, and he certainly didn't even get to enter the promised land. So, and the whole thing with the religion is the Torah gets read, and then we start over again, and it's very interesting because I started formally doing Torah study 25 years ago. So over 25 years, you do the same stories, but you're doing study with other scholars and lawyers and social workers, and everyone's bringing their own opinions to what they're reading in the scriptures, that it's alive. But there's no dogma, there's no doctrine. In Mormonism, there's this thing, at least that's how I understand Mormonism.
And this is a dialogue.
This is the first time we're having this conversation.
Yeah, and I totally understand that you guys are older, that you have a rabbinical interpretative tradition, and that in many ways, Judaism is centuries, if not millennia, ahead of the rest of us, right? What about the cultural identity, though? Because
I want to say something about the cultural identity, because I was raised after the Holocaust, And what we were taught was when they were rounding up Jews, it didn't matter whether you had faith in a divine being or whatever. It just mattered your blood lineage. So that was kind of how I was raised. It's like, I don't have a choice. My mother was Jewish. I'm Jewish, like no matter what, because of that thing. But that was also like a Hitler thing, I think, as I'm reflecting on it. But I mean, the bottom line is you need to do what you want to do and what fits for you, and everybody, really, there's not one way here.
Can I be clear why I'm bringing this up?
Please.
It's not because I'm trying to get you to help me or because I'm challenging you. What I love about what you're sharing with us is it's around trauma and healing from trauma, right? And, you know, it wasn't until last year, like for for over a decade of the history of Mormon Stories, I wouldn't even want to use the cult word on a Mormon Stories podcast episode. And the most that I would do is say, there are cults out there, but then there are high demand religions. And within Mormon Stories, we're going to talk about Mormon Stories within the context of it being a high demand religion, not a cult. And part of that was because I didn't want to alienate or turn off the people that we're trying to reach with the podcast. Part of it was I wanted to be respectful. Part of it was I have so much affection for the church and the people and my upbringing that I didn't want to cross that divide and actually call it a cult. And it wasn't until I was sitting with I'm going to say a transgender, very close family member to me, and my wife Margie, who's one of the nicest, kindest, most compassionate people that I know, who's just not about ever calling anyone any name ever. And this transgender family member and Margie held me to account and said, if there was any other religious group that treated LGBTQ people or women or people of color or abuse victims, right? Or that dealt with its history, or that hid information from prospective investigators or people raised in the faith, if there was any other church or religious tradition that acted in the way the Mormon church does, that wasn't Mormon, would you hesitate to call them a cult? Yeah. And that was the first time in my life, and it was only like a year or two ago, where I was like, oh my gosh, have I been conditioned to where I won't even, Mormon Voldemort, excommunicated from the Mormon church, right? Where like I'm still under the mind control. I'm still under the conditioning. What?
Go Margie.
Well, I love
Power
it that
of women.
Yeah. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is I want to thread that needle of being constructive with our people, right? Of being respectful, and of seeing what blind spots I and we may have in terms of the totality of mind control and or conditioning that many of us still are under. And that's why this is a discussion. I hope it's okay that we're articulating this and even exploring right now in front of you. But that's why I bring it up, not because I'm challenging you.
No, I think it's very cool, and I really want to model that, life is learning and growing, and even, public figures can be like, you're right, I need to rethink that one, to model vulnerability and to say, you're right, it's a great thing. I want to plug a book by Adam Grant called Think Again. I don't know if you've ever heard of Adam Grant. He's a organizational psychologist at the Wharton School of Business. He has a podcast I listen to it every week, but Think Again is a fantastic book. And it basically says, separate your ego from your beliefs and be prepared to think again and change your mind if there's evidence. Yeah, it's great.